It's wonderful to all be together. I wish we could all be together in person, but lovely to see you all on Zoom. I hope you've all got your coffee, because this is our coffee morning get together, isn't it? Yeah, excellent. Cheers. Me too. We just thought it would be really nice to have a kind of recording just to introduce ourselves to everybody on this wonderful anniversary year, celebrating the 85th anniversary of mass observation. Whoever thought it would be here for that long? And I know a conversation that we've just had now, Kirsty pointed out that we've got over 60 years of mass observation experience between us as well. So we're catching up with the archive, we're catching up nearly at our 85 years, but not quite. So, but anyway, I think what we'll do is some introductions, and then I'll ask you to talk about your favourite items, the items that have made the most impact, I think, on you whilst you've been at mass observation. So I'm going to start off with me, and my name is Fiona Courage. I'm Director of Mass Observation Archive, and I've worked with mass observation now for 22 years this year. I started off as an archive assistant on a temporary contract, and I never left. And I liked it so much that I did my doctorate on it as well, based on people's experience of higher education who write for mass observation. Absolutely love it, quite addicted to it, and it's very hard to ever think about not having it in my life. So I'm going to pass over to Jessica.
Okay, so I'm Jessica Scantlebury, and I'm the Mass Observation Archivist. I've been with Mass Observation since 2006, and like Fiona, I started as an archive assistant, but I qualified as an archivist in last year, and then became the Mass Observation Archivist in summer last year, following after a few good women who have taken up that role before me.
Although I think we should say you're the first official Mass Observation Archivist.
Okay, yeah.
Very pleased to have you. Kirsty.
Hi, so I'm Kirsty Pattrick, and I am the Mass Observation Project Officer. I'd say I'm kind of a newbie at 11 years, having been in mass observation. And I oversee the current contemporary project, and oversee the national panel of volunteer writers that we have, who generate an immense amount of material for us every year. And I support the research strand of the project as well, so teaching and providing advice and guidance on researching and using the wonderful collection that we have, which is, you know, as Fiona said, it's an utter joy and very much a privilege, I find, to work with. So that's me.
And Suzanne.
Well, I think I am the newbie, so I've been here 10 years this year, and Suzanne Rose.
10 years.
No, a whole decade, only a decade. I do all the, so I'm the Education and Outreach Officer, and I do all the teaching and learning with the collection. So that was with schools, colleges, universities, and all of the outreach and engagement with the wider community. So that could include public talks and projects, and working with the collection to make it more accessible and inclusive.
Thank you all. And I suppose we should also acknowledge that, you know, we kind of, I love the idea of a newbie being a 10-year 10 years of experience, but our predecessor, Dorothy Sheridan, by the time she had finished her association, although she's still associated with mass observation and always will be, but as her formal association as a trustee, she'd actually served 45 years with the archive. So we've got some way to go yet.
Excellent, yeah.
You will hear at my retirement party, but I, just to sort of kick off, I thought it'd be I'm really intrigued. I'm always intrigued by what people find fascinating about mass observation, because I think it's a vast archive, as we know, and it holds so many various emotions and experiences and opinions and observations that there's something in there for everybody. And I hate to say it's probably very telling about what you might choose, but I'm always intrigued by what people choose as their favourite item, or the item that might have had impact on them. And I'm also aware that changes. So you can say for now it is, but I'd be really interested to know more about what really excites you. And Jessica, what's your favourite thing?
Well, like you say, it changes day to day, and it also can be very affected on what collection I'm working on at that particular time, because I'm very lucky in my role to spend a lot of time with the collections and oversee them coming into the archive as new acquisitions. Again, with our colleague Lottie, who also is in that role as well, of seeing things coming into the building. So there are many collections that I've had love affairs with over the time. But the earliest collection that I enjoyed was a collection that I knew about before I worked for Mass Observation. So when I was doing my A-levels as a history student, all that time ago, I found a book in the library about the National Lesbian and Gay Survey, which is a collection that we hold that was inspired by the Mass Observation Project and set up by one of the Mass Observation Project writers, who felt that the project itself wasn't addressing the needs of queer people at that time, and that there was the potential to run a survey asking questionnaires particularly directed at those needs. So I've always just really enjoyed this collection. And it was an absolute joy when I came to work here and I discovered that Mass Observation held it in its holdings. There's some absolute fascinating questionnaires in there, and also fascinating people who are responding to the directives. Some people with actually quite high profile jobs. And I think the fact that the project is anonymous must have been really important to them, because obviously it's 20, 30 years ago that they're being asked these questions, and it's obviously a completely different landscape now for being a queer person. But over the years, I've seen it grow from a collection that perhaps wasn't used that much to a collection that is really used now, and really students at the university, and all universities will travel quite far to use the collection. And it's been fascinating having conversations about them and why they find the collection useful. That said, in more recent years, I've worked to get that collection digitised with Adam Matthews, who also publish our digital collections. So now that collection can be accessed by a greater number of people. And then in recent years, the collection was used as inspiration for a radio play on BBC Radio 4, which I really enjoyed, because I had some fantastic scenes of actually coming into the archive with some quite severe archivists talking to the
Not
narrator.
you then.
No, it did use our names. Yeah, but yeah, I really enjoyed that radio play, and it was fascinating to see the collection reach different audiences in that way.
I remember listening to that play on the train, actually, on one of the episodes on train coming back from a meeting in London, and I just started crying. Obviously I had my headphones in, so people must have wondered what on earth was going on, but it was such a moving piece of radio, and it really brought to life for me the importance of that collection, because of the fact it's full of voices that weren't being heard. And I wonder what is the reaction, particularly of younger people coming to look at that collection today, 30 years on? Do they?
I think they see the collection as a really interesting place to explore queer history and to find out what life was like 30 years ago. But obviously, I think they still see a lot of similarities as well as differences, and take a lot of strength from reading those voices and reading about the same experiences and the same feelings as well in there. Just to reflect back on the radio programme, if anyone listening, watching this is interested, it was written by somebody called Christopher Green, who's a drag performer, and they have the recording on their website, so you could access it in that way as well. It's nice that it's got legs.
Yeah, perhaps we could put a little link up.
Yeah, in the description.
Attached, yeah, to this would be really good. Is there any particular item in there that really grabs you?
I really like the section about Ken Barrow, who set up the collection. There's a small personal section there, where it has a couple of his personal documents. He unfortunately died of AIDS, and the collection came to us after his passing. But there's a poem in there about his experiences when he was a young man of having the police come to visit him, and it's just quite moving, because they're you know, quite brutal with him, and it's you know, hopefully a different time now.
I love the way that you describe having love affairs with different collections, but the way that you've described that poem really kind of illustrates, I think, the love affairs that we do have with individual items. As I was saying earlier, it's about those sort of experiences that can't necessarily be captured elsewhere or that will be forgotten, and I think that's a really pertinent one.
It's hard for me not to have a love affair with Ken as well, because he was quite a dashing man and also an actor, and there's lots of studio portraits of him that he obviously used to go around and get work. So he's very handsome.
Well, I think what we're hoping to do is share some of these items as well, and we'll kind of share more about how to have a look at those so that people can have a look at the items themselves, but perhaps we can all fall in love with.
Yeah, definitely. His very sparkly blue eyes.
Kirsty.
So yeah, as Jessica said, I mean, depending on how I'm feeling, what groups I've got in, I mean, yeah, mass observation is immense. We've got 3 floors of storage here at the Keep, and mass observation takes up, you know, a good number of rows of that. And it's what I love about mass observation is that every time I have a student group in, every time we're teaching, every time we're out doing talks, I'm diving into material often that I haven't looked at before, and I'm discovering new stuff. So there's always like favorite little nuggets or people that you just get drawn to. But when we were first talking about favorite items, my immediate thought came to the contemporary, and the COVID collection for me has been huge. It's been, I think, a highlight of my career whilst being at mass observation. It's been, I've never said it before, but it's a real privilege to have worked in the generation of such a huge amount of material. You know, we were certainly busy through COVID, you know, we were overwhelmed, and we now have this enormous collection, over 8,500 documents that are being used. And researchers are actively using them now, but we can also see the value, obviously, in the future and for history. And for me, it's been a really powerful thing that it's been very much akin to the wartime material we get out. You know, so much of my teaching time here has been spent getting out the wartime diaries and getting out their responses to the directives. And we talk about the immediacy of the emotions that people were experiencing during that time. And I'm not talking about parallels with war to, you know, a worldwide pandemic, but the similarities for us are in the format of the material. So for the first time in the 40 years of the contemporary project, we've had this huge generation of material where we've had responses to directives that we continued to commission over the 2-year period of COVID, but also we had an open call for diaries. And with that call, we then generated many new writers. We've got many new voices who've come into the collection during that time. And then we also had our annual 12th of May day diary. So we've got this wonderful lens into people's lived experiences during COVID. And, you know, Jessica touched on it earlier when she talked about the anonymity. You know, the strength of mass observation is that our writers write anonymously. And they've always written very openly and candidly, but the material is, you know, the emotion is palpable, you know, what people were going through. And that was because we're also looking at it whilst we're living through COVID. For me, my personal interest is that I got to use it for my MSc dissertation. I explored nature. I was looking at women's encounters with nature and their emotional well-being during COVID. So I was looking at some of those joyful parts as well. And what was interesting about that is I was looking at material from spring and summer and contrasting those 2 time points. But we didn't ask about nature. You know, there was one directive that we did in the summer on time, and we touched upon seasonal changes. But beyond that, we weren't asking anything about it, but it's there throughout. You know, people talked about doing it on their daily walks, how they engaged with nature, discovering places in their locality they hadn't before, connections with people. So it's really rich, and it's really kind of a lovely contrast to people's hopes and fears going through those day-to-day changes and the daily government updates, news updates, with what was happening in the minutiae of their time. So it feels like, I know when COVID first started happening, we started generating this material, we all kind of talked about maybe this is our time, you know, in that period of this immense wealth of material. So yeah, that's where right now my kind of heart and mind went immediately to, because I think it's been such a meaningful time for mass observation. So yeah,
I'm really struck by what you were saying about the sort of identification with writers and people's experiences, you know, that sort of sense of a shared experience that we get with COVID. And that's something that really gets reflected, doesn't it, in certainly in the wartime diaries as well, and writing. And I wonder, do you think that that's what makes mass observation so special, so powerful, is that sense of identification of the everyday that we can have, as opposed to, you know, sort of maybe the diaries of a famous writer or politician?
Yeah, it's those shared experiences, isn't it? It's the voices of many. I certainly know when we've done some previous work with our writers about what attracts people to write for mass observation, you know, you hear it numerous times that people want to be part of that mass. You know, they want to leave a legacy, a part of themselves, but it's about being part of that. And then obviously for those who are using mass observation and engaging in it, it's lovely to hear the nuggets of the kind of the in-depth life story experiences, those lived experiences, alongside so many experiencing a mass event of that time. I know we've spoken in the past when Suzanne's done lots on the 12th of May Day diaries, how you see those trends of like loom bands or the, was it 1 in 5 diet and things. So you kind of get these trends coming through that everyone's experiencing, and their lives are so different, but you kind of get those little elements and threads coming through that kind of everyday lived experience. But it's something everybody can relate to. There's so many voices in there.
And it's interesting that you pulled out loom bands and the 1 to 5 diet, whatever it is. You know, those are things I would completely forget.
Yeah,
because they are just sort of like transitory, passing.
Yeah.
You know, these little trends and the way that that's captured. Particularly with something like COVID, I guess. I mean, is there anything in COVID that you're sort of seeing that we may already be forgetting?
Oh yeah, I mean the levels of media engagement are really interesting. So people talking about how they're controlling their levels of consciously or unconsciously. So people are talking about always sitting down and seeing the daily briefings, or having to control the amount that they're looking at because they're at home so much more and they haven't, so they've got more access to their phones or different media inlets. So there's definitely, with the media engagement, there's lots around families and dynamics and relationships, because suddenly you've got, some people have got, you know, sons and daughters living at home who were at university, for example, or you've got homeschooling. I mean, for me, it was reading through people's experiences of homeschooling when, like, it was palpable. I was battling with it. But it's a joy. There was a really poignant. I really enjoyed reading a writer in Scotland, and there was this beautiful moment in looking at some of the nature material where she talked about her child's last day at school, and apparently it was a tradition that when the end of year happened and it was the last day, the school teacher would sing the class out. And even though school had stopped in the middle of term due to the lockdown, the teacher sang the children out of class, and then she walked back with her daughter through the forest. And yeah, it was just beautiful, such an incredible moment. And then, you know, her diaries talk about being on the front line and managing homeschooling and family dynamics, and keep it, you know, the fears of family who are abroad and what have you. It's all there. The time is such a big sort of trend that runs throughout that. There's lots, and there'll be so much more to come from it. So yeah.
I wonder if maybe you would be able to share an extract from that particular writer when we share the extracts of the things that we love in the archive. That's wonderful. Thank you. I'm still thinking about all of those loom bands and the environmental impact that my own children created all on their own. But anyway, Suzanne, I'm thinking that you're going to take us a bit further back, aren't you? Going to leave the loom band trend.
Oh yes. Well, it was really hard to settle on a favourite. You know, it's like you can't pick your favourite child, can you? And I certainly don't think I can kind of pick my favourite boxes, but there are some that I'm very fond of that I sort of am drawn back to time and time again. And I think that's because mass observation material are really, it's just boxes and boxes of stories about people's lives and their lived experiences, and it's hard not to connect with these people and to kind of want to spend time with them and learn more about them. So I've got a couple of favourite boxes that I'm drawn to, but then I've got a couple of favourite items. I was going to mention something very greedy here, so I've got a few things. So favourite box probably from the early phase of mass observation from the archive is probably Dogs in Wartime. It's one of the ones I go to and teach with quite often. It's quite a joyful box relative to our other kind of wartime material, I suppose, in terms of people's lived experiences of the Second World War. But it always brings something new and exciting. And it's a really lovely way that particularly children can engage with their studies of the Second World War and learn more about the pet evacuation scheme and the invention of the glow-in-the-dark lead for walking your dog in the blackouts and things like that. There's lots of lovely, quirky bits of ephemera in that box that is really interesting to work with and to engage with. I also love from the contemporary collection, from the contemporary project, Dear 16-Year-Old Me, a directive where we ask people to write a letter to their 16-year-old selves. And we have people reflecting back just a few years to people in their 90s reflecting back a lifetime. And it's full of really poignant, wise, generous, kind sort of tributes really to their teenage selves and their teenage lives, but also you get to kind of sort of fill in the gaps and find out how their life unfolded. And that to me is a wonderful thing to be able to kind of immerse myself in. And, you know, I've used it for teaching with teenagers, and they can really relate to it, and they can see value in recording their lives now, so they can look back on their lives in years to come. But also equally, I've worked with it and used it with older people's groups who have really enjoyed that opportunity to reflect and reminisce as well. So it's a really, really wonderful box, and has lots of, as Kirsty said, lots of gems inside. But my favourite documents, if I was to settle on a document, possibly there's from the wartime collections, there's a diary written in September 1939 by a lady, and it is the smallest diary I've come across so far. It would fit in the palm of my hand. It's a tiny ring-bound notebook written in pencil, and it details this lady listening to the wireless, listening to the ultimatum of war, and then in the very next line doing her laundry. And for me, in one small tiny page, it captures the essence of MO really, in terms of recording the huge, impactful, life-changing world events, and the humdrum detail of everyday life. And it's just a really lovely thing. That's probably one of my favourites. And the other would be any of our items from the Beyond Boxes collection, which includes materials written by people who were in HMP Lewis. And I have to say their writing is probably some of the most poignant I've read in my 10 years of being with MO. And certainly that would probably be some of the items that I would select if I had to choose my favourites.
Thank you. I mean, I think that's really pertinent what you say about things that you keep coming back to, because I probably should have phrased it when I asked you the question about what's your favourite thing, but actually it's more about what the things you keep coming back to. I really agree with you on that 16-year-old me. There's something, it just hits the heart of anybody that reads it, because we've all experienced being 16.
Yeah.
So I was wondering about the what you were talking about, some of the most poignant writing that you've come across, and the work that you've done with the prisoners in HMP Lewis, and more broadly, obviously, work that we've done with prisons across the country. And it's, you know, that's a voice that you've had to work to be able to involve in the archive that hasn't been represented before. So what do we learn from those voices? What's different?
Gosh.
What's the same?
Well, I suppose in terms of our outreach work, it's always informed by the founding ethos of mass observation, which is to capture the voices of those who are most often go unheard. And so the work that we've done over the years in prisons, both locally and nationally, has really been to try and seek out those voices and to ensure that the archive is a platform to raise those voices, and to make sure the collection is more inclusive and representative of the diversity of life in Britain today. And I think what the voices from prisoners show us is just not just generally about their lived experience of prison, which is obviously unique and is not necessarily something that comes through the rest of our collections from our panel writers or from our day diary writers, but also about their own sort of just their own lives and their lived experience, so whether it be their childhood, their education, their family life, their background, their communities, and all other things. I mean, I always say, when I talk to people about working in prison, the first thing you want to know is, oh, what do they do? What do they do? And I always say that's, in my experience, you know, not that I ever ask, but if I do happen to know and they have disclosed information, it's usually the least interesting thing about that person. And actually, there's so much more to learn. So I would say, ironically, our prison collections aren't actually about prison at all, really. They're just about, you know, daily life, humanity, feelings, emotions, family, connection, love, aspirations, hope, dreams. And what I learned was that there's so little opportunity for positive engagement within the prison environment, and it is so punishing in many respects that people lose those opportunities to reflect, to share, to listen, to learn, to come together and kind of find some comfort and support. And I think by and large, our sessions that we were able to offer, but certainly and locally in HMP Lewis, offer that opportunity for the men and women there to come together and find some positive opportunities for both learning, but also engagement and sharing. And that's what makes their material that they've shared such a privilege to work with, because we've had to work to build that trust and engagement with those communities of people. And they've worked really hard amongst themselves to build that trust and communities with other people within the prison environment, to feel that they're able to share, and we're able to hold their stories within the collection now and share those with others. So I think for me, that's what makes it so poignant.
It's wonderful. I think the you know, clearly it diversifies what's in the archive, but the real impact is in the participation and what it can give to the people who are participating in it as a project, as a course, as a, you know, as a way of life, that maybe they've started to adopt practices that they're able to take through in terms of care of their mental health and everything. So really wonderful project to you know, hopefully continue being able to engage and to do more of that. Is there anything in particular that you would share, that you'd be willing to share from any of those? I mean, I know that you'll do the small diary, but I wonder if also I allow more than one item and you can kind of do representations of the other two as well.
Absolutely. We have some wonderful poetry, some day diaries, and some creative artwork as well. We'd be more than happy to share.
Excellent. Wonderful. Wonderful.
So how about you, Fiona?
Oh, how about me? How about
so
you?
We're going to put you on the spot now. What's your
well listening to you all, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I could have chosen, oh, I should have thought that one. Certainly from the contemporary, I think I agree. Dear 16-year-old me is one that gets me every time. And in my own doctoral research, I didn't really think of using it until I opened the box. And then I think I got most of my data on people's lives from that. I thought it was extraordinarily revealing and shows the generosity of the writers in terms of what they're prepared to share about their lives. But also I loved the way that you described it, the generosity to themselves, you know, sort of like so often I think teenagers are hard on themselves and very judgmental of themselves, and the amount of voices that said, you know, take it easy on yourself, you're good, you're fine, you know, you and it's something that I hear myself saying to young people of that age now as well. But the object item document that I want to choose is one that actually wraps up, I think, in something that was a moment of clarity for me about what mass observation was, and that's from the early mass observation boxes, and it's from topic collections on air raids. And I was invited to do a talk at Bishopsgate Institute by the wonderful Steph Dickers, and it was all about observing London. And I was there with speakers who were talking about John Stowe's maps of London, the Charles Booth maps of London, poverty maps of London, and so forth. And I kind of brought it up to slightly more contemporary by talking about wartime London and what was observed. And I remember being in the reading room researching it. And I don't know about all of you, but being able to do a talk is really exciting because it's one of the few times we get to sit and research something.
Yeah.
So we can sit in the reading room and look at these amazing objects and records. And I was looking through air raids, looking for stuff on London, and I came across this document by a writer called Olivia Cockett. And Olivia Cockett is probably better known as one of our mass observation diarists. And she lived in London and wrote beautifully. She's a really wonderful writer, and I've actually got the published version of her wartime diaries here, and it's called Love and War in London, edited by the Malcolmsons. I can really recommend it as a good read if you want to know more about life as a single working woman in London during that period. But she did a lot of observational work for mass observation as well. And this particular item is an observation that she made of conversation that she had with a fire watcher called Len. And Len's house had been bombed. His family had gone off, been evacuated somewhere safe into the countryside, but he stayed because he wanted to help, and he wanted to sort of do some fire watching and be an air raid warden. And the account it's very, very funny. It's really funny. There's a wonderful part in it in which there's an attack. He and his mate go to help people from the bombed house. They find an elderly man, and his legs are lying somewhere down the road, and they go, oh God, I can't touch it. And the man opens his eyes, looks at them and says, you biffs, I lost those in the last war. So they're clearly his legs. So I was sitting in the reading room reading this, and I just burst out laughing because it was the way that she wrote it, but I could hear his voice. I could hear his voice amongst this carnage and this wreckage, the laughter that went on, and that sort of camaraderie that was there as well. And then continuing to read on that piece of writing, she then relates how he gets a bit more serious, and he starts to talk about another house down the road that was bombed, and they're getting the parents out. All the parents are killed. They realize that there's a young baby still in there, and he just describes trying to find this baby, and eventually they find it, and sadly it had not survived. And at that point I'd stopped laughing, clearly, and I'd started crying, and I realized I was in the reading room surrounded by other researchers with tears pouring down my face. Not on the documents, don't worry, I didn't hit the documents with tears, which is a problem. It can be a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that was the moment at which I realized how powerful that voice was, because it was I realized, and very naively, that these people had been writing not knowing the war was going to end in 1945, not knowing that we would win. And it is that sort of sense which we're even getting now from those COVID diaries, that when we read the one very early on, people are saying, well, you know, it'll all be over by June, or, oh God, this is it. We're all, you know, none of us will survive this. And that's why that piece of writing is so powerful to me. It really is. And I find it quite hard. This is one of the first times I've been able to talk publicly about it and not get emotional and start crying. And in fact, I will admit that at the Bishopsgate, I did get quite emotional when I got to that bit and I was reading it out. And I think, you know, to be able to work with an archive that can do that to you is such a privilege. It's such a privilege that we get to look after people's lives in that way, you know, the records of their lives in that way. So.
It is, it's a real privilege. And I think, you know, so often we want to honour those voices, and that's something that comes through so strongly, you know, with us all, in ensuring that we can engage people, raising the profile of mass observation. You know, I love going out to community talks and introducing people to mass observation. You know, it's a real joy because there's something for everybody to relate to. But I think, you know, that's what I felt with the COVID material, or it kind of was heightened during the COVID material. It's always there, but it's honouring those voices, because our writers are so dedicated. You know, I'm in awe of the amount they write, the amount of time they give. I mean, when I was doing the research on the COVID material, there was one diary, it was like 47 pages. I mean, that was like, you know, another level.
They're really long, aren't they?
They're really long. There was so much there.
Yeah, it just kept on coming and they couldn't stop writing, which is great.
It is really great, and it's something we're so grateful for and so thankful for, because, you know, it's what's kept us going. But the strength there is that, you know, because people have continued writing as well, you know, we're trying to get people to use it more in that longitudinal way, which I know what you did, Fiona, didn't you, with your kind of doctorate, you know, following people through. And and that's really lovely, because you kind of have really strong relationships and emotions to different people as you go through, and you get caught up, and you know, what happened there?
Even their handwriting can be really emotive, can't it? And when you spot them somewhere else and you're like, oh, it's you.
Yeah.
I recognise that swirl.
Well, maybe that will be a subject for another coffee catch up that we can have, that we can share with people. It might be about the relationships that we have with our writers, and with people who've written many years ago, and how those continue on today. Can I say a huge thank you to you all for your time and for sharing that? I think it's been really moving, and I just could talk for hours and hours, and I think perhaps we will meet again for coffee, and we will explore a little bit more of what mass observation means to us. So thank you very much for your time.